The cats went first. That's always how people remember it starting. The cats. They began convulsing on the docks, twitching and spinning in circles they couldn't stop making, throwing themselves into the sea, drowning themselves. The fishermen watched and didn't understand. They called it the disease of the dancing cats. They thought it was strange. They thought it was sad. They had no idea it was a warning. Hi guys, welcome back. Okay, so before we get into today's story, I need to tell you something. This one hit me differently than most of the stories I cover on this channel. And I cover a lot of dark history. I cover a lot of things that are disturbing and strange and hard to look at. But most of those stories involve unknowns, mysteries, things we can't explain. This story is not like that. This story is completely explained. We know exactly what happened. We know exactly who did it. We know exactly when they knew what they were doing and chose to keep doing it anyway. And that knowing, is what makes this one so much harder to sit with than a mystery ever could be. This is the story of Minamata, a small fishing city on the southwestern coast of Japan, and what one company did to it over the course of decades, and what it cost the people who lived there, and what it cost their children, and their children's children. Let's get into it. So guys, I need to set the scene for you first, because Minamata is not just a name, it's a place. And to understand what was lost here, you need to understand what Minamata was before everything went wrong. Minamata sits on Shiranui Sea in Kumamoto Prefecture on the island of Kyushu, the southwestern tip of the Japanese mainland. In the early 20th century, it was exactly what you'd picture when you imagine a small Japanese coastal town. A fishing community. Generations of families who had lived on the same stretch of water for longer than anyone could remember. The sea was everything there. It was food, it was income, it was identity. Fishermen went out every morning in small wooden boats and came back with hauls of fish and shellfish and octopus from waters that were, by all accounts, extraordinarily abundant. The people of Minamata had a phrase for the relationship between the town and the sea. They called Shiranui Sea their sea of life. That is not a metaphor. That is a literal description of what the water meant to them. It fed them. It sustained them. It had sustained their grandparents and would sustain their grandchildren. The sea was the town and the town was the sea, and this had been true for as long as anyone could remember. And then, in 1908, a company arrived. The company was called Chisso Corporation, and it built a chemical plant on the edge of Minamata Bay. Now guys, in the context of early 20th century Japan, this was not unusual. Japan was industrializing at extraordinary speed. Factories were opening across the country. Chisso's plant brought jobs and infrastructure and economic growth to a small town that had previously relied entirely on fishing. At its peak, Chisso's Minamata plant produced a significant portion of Japan's plastics, pharmaceuticals, and chemical products. The company became the economic backbone of the entire region. It paid local taxes. It funded local schools and hospitals. The mayor of Minamata was, for a time, also the head of Chisso's local operations. The company and the city were, in every meaningful sense, the same thing, which is part of what made what happened next so catastrophic and so hard for anyone to stop. Because here is what Chisso Corporation was doing, guys. From 1932 onwards, and some evidence suggests even earlier, Chisso's Minamata plant was producing acetaldehyde, a chemical used in the manufacture of plastics, and the production process generated a byproduct, methylmercury. Now, if you don't know what methylmercury is, I want to explain it to you carefully, because understanding what it does to a human body is essential to understanding why what happened in Minamata was not just a tragedy, but a horror. Mercury is a heavy metal. It exists in several forms. Inorganic mercury, the kind in old thermometers, is dangerous, but the human body has some ability to process and eliminate it over time. Methylmercury is different. Methylmercury is an organic compound, and when it enters a living organism, a fish, a shellfish, a cat, a human being, it does not die. It accumulates. It binds to proteins in the tissue. It builds up over time, and it has an extraordinary, devastating affinity for one specific part of the body, the brain. Methylmercury crosses the blood-brain barrier, the protective membrane that keeps most toxins out of the central nervous system, as if it isn't there. Once inside the brain, it attacks the neurons. It destroys the cells responsible for movement, for sensation, for vision, for hearing, for cognition. It does this slowly, progressively, and it does it irreversibly. There is no cure for methylmercury poisoning. Once the damage is done, it cannot be undone. And Chisso Corporation was dumping methylmercury, thousands of tons of it over the course of decades, directly into Minamata Bay, into the Sea of Life. So let me take you through what happened, because it didn't happen all at once. It crept, the way all the worst things creep. The first signs, guys, were in the animals. This is always important to understand. The animals were the canaries, the warning system that nobody listened to. The cats started showing symptoms first. Cats eat fish. In Minamata, where fish was the primary food source for the entire community, cats ate an enormous amount of fish. And so they accumulated methylmercury faster than the humans did. By the early 1950s, fishermen and local families were watching their cats behave in ways that made no sense. Convulsions, uncontrolled spinning, stumbling, falling off piers, throwing themselves into the sea. Local people started calling it the dancing cat disease, Nikko Odoribayo in Japanese. Some cats died mid-convulsion. Others simply disappeared. The crows came next. People started finding dead crows in the streets. Seabirds fell from the sky in mid-flight. Fish floated to the surface of the bay, already dead. Shellfish stopped moving in the shallows. The sea that had been extraordinarily abundant began to go quiet. And then the people started getting sick. The first officially recorded human case of what would eventually be called Minamata disease was in April 1956. A 5-year-old girl named Kamimura Michiko was brought to the Chisso factory hospital because, remember, the company ran the local hospital with severe neurological symptoms. She couldn't walk properly. She couldn't speak clearly. She had convulsions. She was confused and disoriented. Her sister, aged 2, showed identical symptoms days later. The hospital's chief physician, a man named Dr. Hajime Hosokawa, immediately began investigating. He was alarmed, not just by the severity of the symptoms, but by how many people were presenting with similar complaints. He reported to the Kumamoto prefectural government that there appeared to be an outbreak of an unknown disease of the central nervous system in Minamata. The date of that report, May 1st, 1956, is now officially recognized as the discovery date of Minamata disease. But guys, here is where the story stops being a medical mystery and starts being something else entirely. Dr. Hosokawa was working in Chisso's own hospital. He had resources and he had access. And he was a dedicated physician who wanted to understand what was destroying his patients. So he did what any good doctor would do. He started investigating the cause. He noticed that the affected families were almost exclusively fishing families. People who ate large quantities of fish and shellfish from Minamata Bay. He noticed that the cats, who also ate the fish, were showing the same neurological symptoms. He began to suspect the food, specifically the fish, specifically the bay. He started running experiments. He fed fish from Minamata Bay to healthy cats in a laboratory setting. The cats developed the same symptoms: convulsions, loss of coordination, deterioration of the central nervous system. In his laboratory notebooks, he documented this clearly. The fish from the bay were causing the disease. The disease was caused by something in the fish, and something was getting into the fish from the water. In 1959, 3 years after the official discovery of the disease, Dr. Hosokawa ran one specific experiment. He fed a cat food contaminated with effluent directly from Chisso's acetaldehyde production process. Cat 400, as it was recorded in his notes, developed Minamata disease. Dr. Hosokawa had his proof. He knew exactly what was causing the poisoning. He knew it was the plant. He knew it was the effluent. He had the laboratory evidence in his hands. And Chisso Corporation ordered him to stop his research and to tell no one what he had found. He complied. He buried the results. Cat 400's existence was hidden, and the dumping continued. Now guys, I need to pause here for a moment, because I want you to really sit with what I just told you. A physician working inside a corporation's own hospital ran an experiment that proved conclusively that the corporation's waste was poisoning an entire city. And the corporation found out, and they told him to be quiet, and they kept dumping. This was 1959. The disease had already been officially recognized for 3 years. People were already sick. People were already dying. Children were already being born with severe disabilities. And the company knew. They had proof in their own hospital. Proof they ordered hidden. The methylmercury kept flowing into the bay for another 9 years after that moment. until 1968. And in those 9 years, guys, and in the years before, going all the way back to the 1930s, the damage that accumulated in the bodies of Minamata's people was beyond anything I can fully convey to you sitting here. Let me try to describe what Minamata disease looks like, because it is important that you understand this, not in the abstract. Specifically, it starts with the extremities. The hands and feet begin to go numb. The fingers lose sensation. The mouth goes numb, lips, tongue, the interior of the mouth. Then the sensory field begins to contract. People describe it as if a circle is closing around them. The circle of what they can feel, what they can see, what they can hear, slowly getting smaller. Their field of vision narrows. Sounds like the sense of touch retreats inward. Then the neurological deterioration accelerates. Movement becomes difficult. The muscles stop receiving clear signals from the brain. Walking becomes stumbling. Fine motor control disappears. Hands that spent decades pulling nets and gutting fish and holding children can no longer hold a cup. Speech becomes slurred, then incoherent. Swallowing becomes difficult and then dangerous. Then the convulsions begin, like the cats, the body shaking beyond the person's control. And through much of this, the mind remains. People could understand what was happening to them. They could see themselves deteriorating. They could watch their own hands stop obeying them. They were inside the disease, aware, unable to stop it. Some patients deteriorated to a state of complete physical incapacitation while remaining cognitively present enough to understand what they had lost. Some screamed when they could still scream. Some became so sensitive to sound and light and touch that any external stimulus caused extreme pain. Some went blind. Some went deaf. Some died in acute episodes, sudden, violent neurological collapse. Those are the people who were already born when the poisoning began. But then there is another category of victim. And this is the part, guys, that I find the most difficult to talk about. Methylmercury does something that most industrial poisons don't do. It crosses the placental barrier. A pregnant woman who has accumulated methylmercury in her body, even a woman who shows no symptoms herself, even a woman who doesn't know she's been poisoned, will transfer that methylmercury to her developing child in the womb. And in a developing fetus, methylmercury doesn't find a brain that is already formed and attacks it. It finds a brain that is still forming, and it disrupts the formation itself. The children born to Minamata mothers who had been exposed to methylmercury, in many cases born to mothers who appeared completely healthy, were born with severe cerebral palsy, with deformed limbs, with intellectual disabilities, with seizure disorders, with bodies that had been damaged before they took their first breath. These children were called congenital Minamata disease patients. And for years, guys, the medical and scientific establishment in Japan debated whether their conditions were actually caused by Minamata disease or whether they were simply cases of cerebral palsy from other causes. Because if congenital transmission was acknowledged, the scope of Chisso's liability would expand enormously. So that debate was allowed to continue. While the children existed, while their families cared for them, while they grew up. One photographer named Eugene Smith came to Minamata in the early 1970s and documented what he found there. His photographs, and I encourage you to look them up because they are among the most important images of the 20th century, showed the human cost of what Chisso had done in a way that no report or testimony could. The most famous of his images shows a mother bathing her daughter, a young woman named Tomoko, a congenital Minamata disease patient, in a traditional wooden bath. The beauty of it, the absolute devastation of it. When Chisso executives found out that Smith was in Minamata documenting the community, they sent men to beat him. He was beaten so severely that he lost sight in one eye. He published the photographs anyway. Now, the government of Japan, because they are part of this story too, guys, and not in a way that reflects well on them. The link between Chisso's effluent and Minamata disease was first formally proposed by researchers from Kumamoto University in 1957, a year after the disease was officially recognized. By 1959, the methylmercury connection was being actively investigated by multiple scientific teams. The evidence was accumulating. The direction of that evidence was clear. And the Japanese government's response was, inadequate is too gentle a word, actively obstructive. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, which had regulatory oversight of Chisso's plant, declined to order the dumping stopped. The reason was economic. Chisso was a major industrial operation. The chemical industry was a pillar of Japan's post-war economic recovery. The idea of holding a major corporation accountable for industrial pollution in 1950s Japan, in a country that was rebuilding itself at extraordinary speed and had made industrial output a national priority, was politically almost unthinkable. So the dumping continued. Chisso did make one change in 1959. They installed a waste treatment system called a Cyclator. They announced publicly that the system was filtering the effluent and that the dangerous discharge had stopped. They made this announcement knowing it was false. The Cyclator did not remove methylmercury from the effluent. It was not designed to. The announcement was not made to solve the problem. It was made to quiet the growing alarm in the public. The methylmercury kept flowing. Patients kept deteriorating. New patients kept appearing. Congenital cases kept being born. And Chisso kept producing. It wasn't until 1968, 36 years after the dumping began, 12 years after the disease was officially recognized, that the Japanese government formally acknowledged that Chisso Corporation's effluent was the cause of Minamata disease. That same year, Chisso finally stopped dumping. Not because they were ordered to by the government in any meaningful enforcement action, but because they had switched to a different production process that didn't generate methylmercury as a byproduct. They stopped dumping because it was no longer convenient to dump, not because anyone made them stop. In 1969, surviving patients and the families of those who had died filed a lawsuit against Chisso Corporation. The Minamata disease trial lasted 4 years. In 1973, the court ruled against Chisso and awarded compensation to the plaintiffs. It was the first time in Japanese legal history that a corporation had been held liable for industrial pollution. The patients and families who were officially certified as Minamata disease victims received compensation. But the certification process itself became a source of ongoing suffering. The criteria for official recognition were repeatedly contested by the government, by Chisso, by medical authorities. Thousands of people who believed they were affected were denied certification. The legal and bureaucratic battle over who counted as a victim and what they were owed continued for decades. The last major legal settlement between Chisso, the Japanese government, and uncertified Minamata disease patients was reached in 2010. That is not a typo. 2010, 54 years after the disease was first officially recognized. 38 years after the first court ruling. Some of the original patients were still alive, still fighting, still not fully acknowledged. Here is something else I need to tell you guys. Because this story does not stay in Japan, the global impact of the Minamata disaster, specifically the legal and regulatory response to it, changed the way the entire world thinks about industrial pollution and corporate liability. Japan passed some of the strictest environmental protection laws in the world in the 1970s, directly as a result of Minamata and similar industrial pollution disasters that followed. The concept of the polluter pays principle in environmental law, the idea that the entity responsible for contamination is financially responsible for remediation, gained enormous traction internationally in the wake of Minamata. In 2013, the United Nations adopted the Minamata Convention on Mercury, an international treaty signed by 128 countries that governs the production, use, and disposal of mercury pollutants. The treaty was named after Minamata specifically, as an acknowledgement, as a reminder, as a way of saying, this is what happens when no one is watching. This is what it costs. The convention is still in force today. The Bay of Minamata was declared officially clean in 1997, after decades of dredging and remediation efforts removed the mercury-contaminated sediment from the seafloor. The nets that had been placed across the bay entrance to prevent contaminated fish from entering the wider sea were removed. People were told the water was safe again. I say told. I want to be careful about that word. The people of Minamata had been told things before. Many fishing families returned. The Sea of Life, they hope, is the Sea of Life again. But the damage done to the human community, the illness, the stigma, the decades of fighting for recognition, the children born with conditions they carry to this day, the distrust between the community and the institutions that failed them, that does not clean up the way mercury sediment cleans up. That does not get dredged from the bay and disposed of. That stays. And this is what I keep coming back to, guys. Because throughout this entire story, From the first convulsing cat on the docks to the last uncertified patient fighting for recognition half a century later, there was never a moment where no one knew. Someone always knew. Dr. Hosokawa knew in 1959 and was told to be quiet. The executives who ordered him to be quiet knew. The ministry officials who declined to act knew what the scientific evidence was pointing toward. The Chisso engineers who designed the Cyclator and announced it as a solution knew it wasn't one. This was not ignorance. This was not an accident in any meaningful sense of the word. Accidents happen when people don't know what they're doing. The people in this story knew exactly what they were doing. They made a calculation that the cost of stopping, the economic cost, the liability cost, the reputational cost, was higher than the cost of continuing. And the cost of continuing was paid by the fishermen and their families and their children and their children's children, by the cats on the docks, by the birds falling from the sky, by Tomoko in the wooden bath. Not by Chisso. Chisso Corporation still exists, guys. It was restructured in 2011 into a holding company. It still operates chemical plants in Japan. It paid the compensation ordered by the courts and the settlements required by law. It issued formal apologies. And it continued. The people of Minamata are still there too. Still fishing, some of them. Still living with what happened. Still carrying, in some cases literally in their bodies, in their cells, in the cells of their children, the evidence of what a corporation decided was acceptable. The cats don't dance anymore. The sea is clean, they say. But if you go to Minamata today, and people do go, because there is a museum there now, because the city has made the deliberate choice to remember rather than to erase, you will find something that surprises a lot of visitors. The people there are not defined by bitterness. Many of them are defined by something much harder to maintain. Dignity. The survivors and their families built something else. A testimony. A record. A warning delivered not just to Japan, but to the entire world through the convention that bears their city's name. They turned the worst thing that ever happened to their community into something that protects other communities from the same fate. That is not a comfortable ending. It is not a satisfying one. It is not justice in any pure sense of the word. The price was too high and the reckoning came too late, and too many people paid too much. But it is what they made of it. And I think that is worth knowing. Okay, guys. That is the story of Minamata. The dancing cats. The sea of life turned into a sea of poison. The children born into a world that had already decided their suffering was acceptable. The physician who found the proof and was told to bury it. The corporation that knew and kept going. The government that looked the other way while it was politically convenient to do so. This is not a mystery. We know who did this. We know when they knew. We know what they chose. I want to know what you think, guys. And I don't just mean about Minamata specifically. I mean about what this story tells us about how corporations and governments and communities interact. About what accountability actually looks like and how long it takes to arrive. About what we do with our rage when the answer to "how did this happen?" is simply, people decided it was worth it. Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know where you land on this one. If this video was worth your time, and I hope it was, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Seriously. Bye.